There's something strange about the way American schools look. Long, windowless hallways, locked doors, security cameras and metal detectors, cinder block walls painted beige, a bell that tells you when you're allowed to move. If this feels familiar, it should, because it doesn't just look like a school, it looks like a prison. But this isn't just a metaphor. Many American schools, especially in low-income and urban areas, were literally designed using prison blueprints. Some were even drafted by the same architects. Architects like William Ittner, whose H-plan layout was praised for how easily teachers, or guards, could monitor behavior. Others, like Gordon Bunshaft, helped shape both federal buildings and brutalist school campuses, all using the same logic: efficiency, order, control. They said it was about safety, about supervision, about saving money. But the result was a generation of kids who grew up learning inside buildings that were never designed to inspire, just to contain. In 1843, an individual by the name of Horace Mann stepped off a carriage in Prussia, the militarized kingdom at the heart of modern-day Germany. What he found there would change the American classroom forever, because in Prussia, school wasn't about imagination. It wasn't about passion or self-expression. It was about discipline. And man, he was mesmerized. The Prussian system had a goal: train loyal soldiers, efficient workers, obedient citizens. Students were grouped by age, taught by a single authority figure. They stood when spoken to, moved on a bell, and followed orders without question. It was a system built on hierarchy, no curiosity, just control. And to Horace Mann, it looked like progress. Mann returned to Massachusetts with a mission: to modernize American schools using the Prussian blueprint. And over the next 50 years, that blueprint would spread across the country, embedding itself into every classroom, every school bell, every hallway. We didn't just adopt their system, we inherited their logic. A good citizen follows the rules, and a good school teaches them how. And so, before we ever built schools to look like prisons, we built them to act like them. Because the goal was never to grow minds, it was to standardize them. By the late 1800s, America was booming. Factories, railroads, immigrant labor, and the classroom was evolving to match it. The goal wasn't to educate farmers anymore. It was to prepare the children of the industrial age, to sit down, follow instructions, and work a shift. So schools started to borrow from factories. In 1906, the Carnegie Foundation created something called the Carnegie Unit, a system that measured education by time spent in class, not by mastery. 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, for 120 hours. That was now considered a unit. And if you stacked enough units, you graduated. It didn't matter what you learned, it mattered that you sat still long enough. Meanwhile, architects were standardizing the physical structure of schools as well. One of the most influential was William B. Ittner, who designed over 400 schools across the US. His most popular design? The H-plan. It featured long hallways with classrooms on either side, making it easier for administrators to monitor multiple spaces from one central point. It was clean and it was efficient, and it would later be repurposed for something else entirely. Even the language began to shift. Class periods, bell schedules, principals overseeing operations. By the 1920s, the American school wasn't just a school. It was a training ground for the American worker, and everything about its structure reflected that. So the question was no longer, what should a child become? It was, where should we place them in the machine? And if you're designing for placement, not purpose, you don't need a cathedral of learning. You need a sorting facility. And that's exactly what we built. After World War II, the US faced a new kind of challenge. Millions of new children entering a rapidly urbanizing world. The baby boom, suburban sprawl, and school desegregation meant new schools had to be built, and fast. And they were, tens of thousands of them. But not all schools were built equally. In white suburbs, new schools were sprawling, well-lit and sometimes even experimental, designed to promote creativity, community, and comfort. But in black and brown neighborhoods, schools were designed for containment, small windows, no courtyards, fewer exits, sometimes no playground at all. This wasn't an accident. It was a product of urban planning, redlining, segregation, urban renewal projects, all worked together to disinvest from inner-city communities, and that included their schools. By the 1960s, some school districts had even begun hiring prison consultants to help design low-cost, high-durability school buildings in high-risk areas. One of the most prominent architects of the time was Gordon Bunshaft, a pioneer of brutalist architecture. Bunshaft and firms like Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill designed everything from public schools to correctional facilities to government housing, all with the same aesthetic: concrete slabs, narrow windows, and harsh lines. They weren't building schools to spark wonder. They were building infrastructure for obedience. Inside, the message was even clearer: uniform dress codes, security officers walking the halls, a principal's office that felt more like a warden's. All of it happening decades before Columbine or mass shootings became part of the public conversation. By the 1970s, especially in low-income urban neighborhoods, schools didn't just feel like preparation for prison. It started to feel like prison itself. And soon, the line between the two would begin to disappear entirely. By the 1980s, America was panicking about drugs, about gangs, about violence in the streets. And that panic made its way into the classroom. Zero-tolerance policies, originally created for airline hijackings, were now being used on children for things like talking back, wearing the wrong shirt, or forgetting their hall pass. In 1994, the Gun-Free Schools Act was passed. It required every state receiving federal funds to expel any student who brought a weapon to school, and later expanded to include drugs, threats, and general disruptive behavior. What counted as disruptive? Well, that was up to the school. And in many cases, the punishment didn't fit the infraction. That same year, the Clinton administration passed the largest crime bill in American history, including $750 million to place police officers in schools. By the late 1990s, there were over 12,000 school resource officers patrolling U.S. hallways. Not guidance counselors, not conflict resolution specialists, police. Meanwhile, the school buildings themselves, especially in cities, were retrofitted for containment. Security measures, locking doors, reinforced windows, and camera systems built for one thing: monitoring. And once policing was in place, the pipeline activated. Between 1997 and 2007, the number of school-based arrests more than doubled. Kids were being booked for graffiti, vandalism, verbal disrespect. Some were as young as 6 years old, and the majority of them were students of color. The classroom had become a courtroom, the principal a probation officer, the hallway a holding cell. And at every level, the message was the same: you're not here to be nurtured. You're here to be watched. All of this was justified in the name of safety. But the data told a different story. Schools with police were no safer. In fact, they were more likely to criminalize normal adolescent behavior that could have been handled with a conversation. By the end of the 1990s, students weren't just walking into schools that looked like prisons. They were walking into schools that functioned like them, and many never made it out. Because in the next decade, the line between school and incarceration would blur completely. By the early 2000s, the warnings had become statistics. In schools with permanent police officers, students weren't safer, but they were getting arrested. A lot. For fighting, for cursing, for skipping class, even for being late. In 2019 alone, over 54,000 students were arrested in school, and many of them were under 12 years old. This is what civil rights groups began calling the school-to-prison pipeline, a system where discipline turns to punishment, punishment turns into records, and records follow students for life, not because they were criminals, but because they grew up in a building that treated them like one. And the impact wasn't felt equally. According to the U.S. Department of Education, black students are suspended and expelled at 3.5 times the rate of white students, and students with disabilities are twice as likely to be referred to law enforcement. The pattern wasn't random. It was systemic, and for some students, the pipeline wasn't a metaphor, it was real. Like Khalil Cumberbatch, who was arrested at 17 for a non-violent offense. The school had no counselor, but it had police. He served over 6 years in prison. Or Grace, a 15-year-old in Michigan who was sent to juvenile detention for missing online homework. And yet, even as the data becomes undeniable, schools kept doubling down. More cameras, more guards, more lockdown drills, less funding for counselors, less trust in students. By 2020, there were more cops in schools than nurses, more security cameras than therapists. And while all this was happening, a different kind of school was being built. In countries like Finland, New Zealand, and Japan, No police, no zero tolerance policies, just open space, natural light, and educators trained in de-escalation. So when people say we don't have a better model, they're wrong. We've just chosen not to build it, at least not for everyone. Because the truth is, if you raise children inside a building that's cold, locked, and watched, it shouldn't be surprising if some of them grow up expecting punishment, not possibility. The pipeline doesn't start in prison. It starts here. For over 150 years, American schools have followed a blueprint, not just in their architecture, but in their purpose. From Prussia to the factory floor, from red line neighborhoods to zero tolerance laws. We didn't just build places to learn, we built places to obey. Places to be processed, sorted, and punished. But buildings can be redesigned, systems can be dismantled, pipelines can be broken. There are schools right now doing it differently, where the goal isn't silence, it's understanding. Where students aren't supervised, they're supported. The question isn't whether we can fix education, it's whether we're willing to change what it was built for in the first place. Because when we design schools like prisons, we shouldn't be shocked when they start producing prisoners. But when we design schools like communities, we just might build something worth graduating into.